Today on The Principal's Office.
An axiom in mathematics is a logical statement that is assumed to be true, and they're self-evident. And they serve as the starting points for deducing and inferring other truths. So once you have the axioms, you build the entire system based on the axioms. Those are your accepted truths. You don't have to go back and question. And one of the axioms I want to put on the table today is that black children are brilliant. And so all the comments that I make will reflect my own personal belief in the brilliance of black children as axiomatic, not a conjecture, not if, not maybe, but matter of fact. And it turns out that the prevailing discourses about black children, and many of you will recognize this, are heavily invested in talking about their mathematical illiteracy, their mathematical inferiority as the primary identities for black children. And I want to make a claim. And the claim is that designing effective and meaningful mathematics education for black children based on their brilliance is fundamentally different from building effective and meaningful mathematics education based on so-called racial achievement gaps and propositions about how black children differ from white and Asian children. And it turns out that the vast majority of pedagogical and curricular interventions are based on the latter and not the former.
Black people are brilliant. How do I know? Because today's guest has spent her entire career proving it through her actions, her words, and her voice to us as the black community. With 17 years or more in education, she is the cultural humility coach at Grace James Academy of Excellence right here in Louisville, Kentucky. And in her position, she gets to inspire the desire to challenge power imbalances by recognizing that each person, the student, the family, the community, and the teacher, brings something different to the traditional ways of doing things. Black people are brilliant. Welcome to today's show, our guest, Miss Sashray McCormack. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This is so exciting.
All right, so I'm going to start with the easiest question of all, and that is, why do we need permission to be brilliant?
Well, it's not necessarily that you need permission. It is saying that now this is your space to be what you are as brilliant. Because so often I found that students felt like they were not safe in the space to be able to talk about what they wanted to talk about. So when I say permission to be brilliant, it's not from a type of supreme type of standpoint, but from a standpoint of saying, yes, I have something to say and I want you to hear me. And so I feel like we all have that in us, but unfortunately black people have not been seen as brilliant. White people don't ever have to have permission to do it. They just do it, right? And that's what I want our students to be able to do, is just do it, like Nike, right? Just do it.
Right, right. Okay, so permission to be brilliant, how did that come to you, the term, the thought, where did that come from?
That is so interesting. I was thinking about that probably sometime last year. And I remember when I was teaching African American history.
In an elementary school?
At an elementary school by the name of Mill Creek Elementary.
And who was your principal, by the way?
Michelle Pennix was my principal.
That's right.
And the Courier Journal wanted to interview me about this or whatever. And I remember being on the phone with, I think her name was, gosh, her name is escaping me at this point. But she was just kind of asking me questions. And I was like, look, I just give students permission to be brilliant. And then that's what she named the article that was in the Courier Journal around this time, about 3 years ago. It was in 2018. And she was like, wow. And I thought to myself, wow, you know, that kind of started to stick with me. And so one of the things that I would constantly say to the students when I would ask them, how are you doing today? I didn't want them to say good, fine. Not that they weren't good or fine. I wanted them to say beautiful and brilliant. And I always, like, if they didn't say it, I'm like, wait a minute, what'd you say? And then they know to say beautiful and brilliant. So the idea of permission to be brilliant is wanting our Black kids to get deep down in their total being that that's what they are.
Absolutely.
And know it. That no one can take that away from them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so recently I was doing some reading and some listening to Yolanda Seeley Ruiz, who happens to be out of Columbia University, teacher, and she talks about a racial literacy development. And in that she talked about archaeology of self, and that the work that we need to do as educators is really about self. And so how does that concept of permission to be brilliant transfer to adults and knowledge of self so that we can transfer that to our students?
Oh, absolutely. That is, yes. So what it is actually a point in time where we have to look at ourselves in the mirror. It's really about being being reflective. And what I'm hearing is that it does have to start with self first. Because if you don't believe it, how can you encourage someone else to believe it? And one of the things I think about too, when I was teaching, we listened to the clean version of Kendrick Lamar's DNA. And connecting the whole idea of like an interdisciplinary way of doing things. Like one of your guests that you had on about
Brainstem University.
Yes, and understanding that it is interdisciplinary. It's not just this one way of thinking and one way of being, because people just often think about engineering and so on and so forth. That when we're saying this, we're making all of these connections. And in order to make those connections, as I said, with teachers, community, and students, we have to be reflective. We have to liberate ourselves from ourselves. So what I'm hearing in that is having to look at yourself in the mirror and start to peel back the layers of things that you have been taught, things that you have learned in school. Majority of the things that I've learned, I didn't learn in school. I didn't learn in college, right? So it is really peeling back the layers as an individual, as educators, to say, okay, I'm going to have to start doing some digging myself.
My name is Yolanda Seeley Ruiz. I'm an associate professor at Teachers College, Columbia University. My goal in life is to get those who want to be teachers and those who want to teach in so-called urban schools to get it right. And simply put, the archaeology of the self, like an archaeological dig. My goal is to engage them into thinking about themselves and what their roles and responsibilities are in the classroom. And so if you don't do that work for yourself, how are you really going to be open to the stories and the lives of the students that you teach? Like an archaeological dig. It is for the teachers to really think deeply about how these issues live in them. Issues of race, issues of class. And if you're not open with your story, if you do not think deeply about how these issues live in you, you will just exact harm. You will traumatize. You will say racist things unless you really take time to understand, particularly if you're white, how you have been raised to be a racist if you're in this country. And if you're a person of color, how you may have taken in internalized racism. And so this kind of deep work, I believe, has to be done before we can even begin to have someone take up theoretical practices or to examine your pedagogy. And so this is the work that we try to fight against, whether it's through racial literacy or culture responsive education. It really is the racism that is deeply threaded through our society, and certainly schools are not unique.
And that's kind of where it started for me is digging, especially when you're hearing your babies think that they equate blackness with being bad. And when that's like heartbreaking, right?
Yeah.
And we have so many kids sitting in spaces, even virtually,
yeah,
where they think their blackness is equated with something negative and something bad because of the messaging that they're getting from their teachers.
So here's one of the questions I'll ask, and I saw this recently on another special that was talking about what do we do in our schools now to make sure that that's not happening? What do we do when we see and we hear conversations, comments that do nothing but continue to propel that thought that blackness is bad, that there's something wrong with you inherently, that psychologically you're different in a negative way?
We have to open up our mouths, right? And yes, it's tiring because let me tell you, I always got something to say, right? But we have to. I mean, how can you be reflective if someone's not like pushing you to do that and be that? I just recently read, I think it was on The Hill, a Montessori school in Utah. They gave parents the option to not teach Black history.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Now, that is an issue. Why are you getting the option, first and foremost? Second, we need to look at what it is you're teaching. Because historically, when we look at our textbooks, we have to think about who are the ones putting out the textbooks, who are creating the textbooks. And when you trace all the way back to the Daughters of the Confederacy, they were the ones that had that power. And so the textbook people wouldn't put anything out unless they went through them first because they had so much power. So we have to start tracing back to where the power is, right? And so when I talk about challenging those power imbalances, I'm talking about students saying, excuse me, Miss Pennix, I read something that kind of counters what it is that you just taught me. And I'm not trying to be like question you, but I am trying to question you, right? So, and you have to be able to create spaces for the kids to be able to have that inquiry, to be able to question what it is they're being taught.
Well, wait a minute. Let me stop you there because I think it goes even deeper than the classroom, right? So
absolutely.
We talk about that as parents, and I think that's one of the things that we really struggle with because, you know, you can't turn off that switch when you go to school and come home. If you're developing critical thinkers, you're developing critical thinkers all the time.
All the time.
And so what does that look like? What do we as a community need to do as parents to help develop that in our children, to make them critical thinkers and to question without getting smacked across the mouth like, 30 years ago?
You talking about like towards parents?
Yeah. How do we continue to develop that as critical thinkers? How do we develop critical thinkers in our children?
So, and that's a great question because you think about as your child, your daughter or your son saying, well, wait a minute, mama. Now, but you want them to do that and understand and there is a fine line there as a mom and a dad, right? But what you're doing is you're also teaching them to be collaborators, creators, innovators. Let them ask you questions, right? What is wrong with your child asking you questions? And understanding as your child, if they're saying it to be
smart enough.
Yeah.
Right.
Or if they're really asking. My 5-year-old always asks questions.
He can't help it.
He can't help it. He's always asking questions. So we have to go back to that thinking process. And even though we may be talking about a middle school or a high schooler asking questions, I think oftentimes parents feel some kind of way about their kids asking them a question because they may not necessarily have the answer to the question.
So what do you say? I don't have the answers, so you say.
I don't have the answers. So let's see if we can find it out together. That's where the collaboration piece comes in, right? Because we are not raising our kids with the critical consciousness, especially when we think about even our white kids. because they don't have to. They don't have to ask questions.
Right.
And I know that some people are going to be watching this and thinking, okay, now you're going too far. Historically, I mean, we are where we are for a reason. We are in this situation when it comes to race for a reason, because questions are not being asked. And you not wanting to deal with the questions that are being asked. So that is where the permission to be brilliant comes in for our black and brown students, our black students in particular. Because I even know just today a student was saying, well, the teacher wants to be able to, also talk about, LGBTQ plus issues and so on and so forth. I think those are important as well.
Absolutely.
But being LGBTQ and black is different than being that and white. Right? And it's that where the intersectionality piece comes in, right? You step into a room and you're all of these things.
Right.
But sometimes you step into a room where they don't want you to be this one thing. They want you to be this thing. But you need to go into that space with all of it, right? With everything about yourself. So
yeah, that black exceptionalism is so,
absolutely.
I remember that part of that conversation, and just wanting to put the black issues a little bit to the side, and why can't we all get along is what I kind of call it, and it's past that.
But when you look at even just the civil rights movement, black folks are why we have rights for LGBTQ, right? So I think a lot gets lost in just people not really knowing the history. Now, am I saying I know everything about history? Absolutely not. I'm still learning. I'm always trying to learn.
Always trying to stay ahead of it.
Absolutely.
Because it's coming so fast.
Absolutely. Giving myself that permission to do that space to do that, so that I can say, wait a minute, well, what about X, Y, and Z,
Absolutely. And so, talk to me for a second. There's a lawyer named Derricka Purnell who talks about the systems we have today are really just about managing inequality. That we create positions just to manage inequality. That we're not addressing what's wrong. We just manage it. And so, not anything against diversity, equity, and inclusion positions all throughout the world now, but that's what she kind of held up as an example. That instead of trying to get to the root and dismantle, we manage it. What's your thought on that?
I call it performative. Right? It's putting on a performance so that people can just look at the performance and not dig deep into what really they need to dig in deep to, right? So, I mean, just think about the Super Bowl, right? You're looking at these images, or even like Apple Watch having a Black History Unity watch that people are running to try to go and get. Like, it's Black History Month, and everybody's like, we got to do this Black History program. We got to do this. We got to do that. But I even want to think about our local poet, Hannah Drake. On her blog, she talks about, okay, let's talk about white history.
Ah, yes. Yes.
So white folks,
learn your history.
Learn your history, really, right? And how horrible it was, right? So what I hear you saying is that what happens is we put on a lot of performance. And I think also about, like, Bettina Love in an interview, she talks about how, we always talk about we want allies. And I see these diversity, equity, inclusion departments as allies. It's like some of them have all of the books, right? They know all the buzzwords. They have all of that, but they're not willing to take any risk, right? So she talks about being co-conspirators, being able to take a risk in order to change some systems.
Yeah.
not racist you gotta be to complain about the shortest month of the year. Maria Montessori Academy in Utah posted to the school's Facebook page, this year parents will be able to exercise their civil rights to not participate in Black History Month at the school. When did remaining willfully ignorant become a civil right? It's bad enough that Black History Month is relegated to 1 month a year and even then whitewashed to make everybody feel better. But here you have an educator telling parents that it's optional. Black history is American history. Your refusal to accept that fact is pretty much why Black History Month exists. Not allowing your children to learn about it is doing them a disservice. It's not optional.
So let me ask you this, and you talk about that risk. I've known you for several years now, and sometimes what brought us, I think, close together is one day where you took a risk and questioned me, and we went back and forth for a while. But talk to us about do you remember a time where it became clear to you? Do you remember a time, an experience where you took your first risk or risk just to be who you are now, to be unapologetic about your blackness and granting yourself permission to be black? Or has this always, and brilliant, has this always been a part of who you are, you think?
I think it may have, but I never really maybe thought about it, I guess you can say. I think what really pushed it out even more was more and more years in teaching, right? Looking at our beautiful and brilliant kids and people not seeing it. And I'm like, what? Because we're so into tradition, but one beautiful thing about tradition is traditions can be changed, right?
That's what this year's taught us, right?
Absolutely.
All the traditions have went out
the door. And what's happening is people are suffering from that cognitive dissonance, right? They have like all this evidence, but it doesn't meet their core beliefs, right? So they're just kind of like, they're trying to hold on to their white supremacy. They're trying to hold on to whatever, because now they're scared. Because fear is a type of fear for them. It's like, oh my gosh, now I'm going to be questioned about X, Y, and Z, and it's scary to them. So for me, I think it was more so just looking at our babies and saying, no, man, what do you think? And the interesting thing is, it is so hard when you give them the space, some of them, to start being even creative. Because they're scared, they don't know how to be creative or to step outside or color outside the lines or whatever the case may be, because everything is, do this. It should be this way. It should be this way.
I remember when you were at school, we had another teacher there who actually did a creativity test. And I remember test, if that's what we want to call it. But we found out very quickly that, the first half of kindergarten, they were just as creative as they wanted to be.
Absolutely.
But as they moved into the second half of kindergarten and on in the first grade, it began the lesson. And we're just talking about simple things like, draw something on this page from this box.
Absolutely.
What else could it be?
Yes.
And initially, it was a rocket or anything else, and then it just became a house. And then it became a box.
Yep.
Because they did not have permission.
They did not have permission.
They did not have permission to be brilliant.
Yes.
Wow.
You have to create that space for them to ask those questions and for them to kind of explore and be, because really, like I said, the guest that you had on before, previously,
Brainstem, right.
Brainstem is really making those connections around, again, like I said, creativity and collaboration and those things. And when I talk about the collaboration piece, we got to think at school we're taught we can't work with anybody else. You got to look at your paper only. You don't talk to anybody else, and that's what.
And don't you think, but doesn't it amaze you that that's still happening? I mean, when you think about how far, you talk about evolving. I was thinking about that with myself and just saying, right now I'm so grateful to God that, he allows me to continue to evolve. You know, don't ask me what I thought about this last year, because it has totally changed. I am not the same person 3 years ago that I am today. But isn't it amazing when you look around and some people don't go through that process? They haven't given themselves permission.
They haven't given themselves permission, right? And let me say, too, sometimes it's tiring, right? Because you have things to say and people are like, oh my gosh, here she go again, right? But it's like, yeah, here I go again. And I'm going to keep on going.
Because it's not changing.
Because it's not changing. You know, I had people send me emails, well, publicly try not to say X, Y, and Z. Why? You're sending me an email privately about it. Yeah. Right? So, yeah, it is the whole idea of evolving and growing that we have to give ourselves permission to be able to do. I'm glad I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago. Right?
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm not the same person I was even when I started to get to the point of trying to say, okay, give kids permission. Have I done everything right and perfect throughout my career as a teacher? Absolutely not. But you have to look at yourself reflectively in the mirror and say, okay, I could have done or said something different. So the next group of kids that I come into a space with, I know not to do what I did before.
Now, I'm going to put a pin right there because I want to break off, and I did this with the previous guests as well, because I think it's just natural to our community to talk about our homes as well. And one of the things that I know about you is that you have three very only children, is what I'll call, because of their age difference. And I wonder how you have evolved in your parenting, if you notice a difference, and what that lesson is for the other parents that are listening in.
Oh, major difference. From my 21-year-old, 15 and 5, my 21-year-old, I felt like I had to always use that discipline of how, I was taught. Spanking is always the first thing that you want to go to, right? And that's not the way that you solve anything, right? And I'm not saying, spare the rod, spoil the child.
Right.
I
we
get
know
all
that.
But I think that I am creating space more for the very youngest in his creativity. But I think my parenting has evolved a lot. And listen, nobody gets a handbook in parenting, but I will say that, even now with my 21-year-old, trying to have conversations with him as an adult is still kind of difficult because he has questions too, but I'm like, boy.
But we didn't give those 21-year-olds permission to be brilliant like we did the 5-year-old.
Right.
It was like, you need to ask a couple of times before, I get it. But that's a lesson for parents that, we've got to loosen the strings and not think that the way our parents, it was right for them at their time, just like what we do is right for our time. But when you know better, you do better.
Absolutely.
All right. So one of the things I've noticed is you've got a permission to be brilliant mask. You've got a permission to be brilliant T-shirt. So how do you get one of those? What do you have to do?
So what I am doing now is I want to be able to give them away.
Okay.
Working towards other things, but to be able to give T-shirts away to our students. I want to be able to tell people, listen, keep doing what you're doing. Here's a T-shirt, right? And not to make it sound so simple, but I want, because everybody needs a bit of encouragement to push forward in their thought process and what they're thinking. Really, that's what my goal is to really create that space.
And you know what's so interesting about that is, as a leader, as a teacher, as an educator, you know it when you see it.
You do.
Not just, you see kids coming into it, but when you run into that traveler, that kid who who you know has been given that space and is taking full advantage of it, you do want to encourage them. You want to tell them, keep going, baby.
Yes,
We're depending on you.
Yes.
We need you.
Yes.
So that is such a good idea. Okay, so how do we get in touch with you to tell you we have someone brilliant to be recognized?
So first, you can also follow me on Twitter. I am at Inspire Sashray.
And we've got that up on the screen for you.
Yes, and also my email is my first and last name at gmail.com. So it's Sashray McCormack at gmail.com. And I know you may be wondering, so what is it specifically that you're looking for? I can't say specifically. It's just like even what you said, you just know it, right? It's like you see a story and you're just like, ooh, I want to give them a shirt, right? It's just like almost kind of like this badge of honor to say, you know what? I am brilliant.
Absolutely.
You know, like am I right about everything? It's not about being right, but it's about creating that space to challenge systems, challenge the way things are done or have been done, and change them. Be that innovator.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. I was so looking forward to this because I knew I would get healing. I knew that having conversations like this in this season and this time really bring healing. And we've got to have more conversations like that. So I know you have been blessed the same way I have by today's guest, Sashray McCormack. There's only one of them anywhere, so she should be easy to get in touch with. She has blessed us today with permission to be brilliant. We hope that she's encouraged you like she has me, and we just want to welcome you and thank you for being such a wonderful guest. We appreciate you taking the time to spend with us as we learn more about our community and all the great things that it has to offer here on the Principal's Office. I am Michelle Pennix, Principal Pennix to most. I will meet you here next week, same time, same place. And until then, as always, thank you, and to God be the glory.